Namaste, everyone. Michele Granberg here. Welcome to another episode of Positive Energy, bringing enlightening television for your evolving soul. Our topic on this show is compassion. Compassion involves a level of sensitivity which causes us to be emotionally moved by the experiences of others. Compassion motivates people to go out of their way to help someone who is suffering. How can we develop more compassion, including self-compassion? That's what my guests and I will discuss. So stay tuned because Positive Energy starts right now. So Positive Energy welcomes Stephanie, Kapu, and Beth to the show for a conversation about compassion. So compassion, when focused outward, is connecting with the pain of others in a concerned and loving way. And Buddha talked about compassion as sympathy and love in action. So let's talk a little more about compassion, this timely conversation. I'd like to start with you, Stephanie. How do you define compassion, and what comes to mind when you think of compassion?
So I define compassion as being connected to somebody's suffering. So you can see someone that's suffering, and that's kind of the difference between empathy and compassion. I could see it. I could actually become distressed if I see that Beth is suffering. But if I take a little bit of a different approach where I say, what could I do? Or what can we do to connect? Maybe I'm going to talk to her. I'm going to say, is there anything I can do? Or even if she was my client, I might say something like, don't be so hard on yourself. And maybe some self-compassion there would help. So compassion really is an action.
It's about the connection, right, between us. It's about the relationship, the kind relationship between us, and practicing that and expressing that.
Over and over.
Over and over as a way of being.
Yeah.
That's what we'd love it to be.
Yeah.
Love that definition. And Kapu, how about for you? Anything to add for that?
So I think the only one thing I would add to that is it's about also getting outside of your head and looking at it from their perspective. Then we can be a little more compassionate towards them.
Yeah, it's seeing ourselves in others. And we're very, very have commonalities that way. How about for you, Beth?
Well, and I very much like your definition, and mine is pretty similar, kind of looking at compassion as this kind of sensitivity to suffering with this deep motivation to alleviate and prevent it. So it's somewhat aspirational, I think. And also just the courage that's really required to kind of go to those difficult places and keep coming back when we need to help make that change happen.
I love that. I love that. So, compassion is our natural state, right? We could call it a spiritual state, but it's a characteristic. Can we cultivate it? Are we born with it? I would say yes, we're born with it. Do we lose it or not lose it? It really is also an extension of love. It really is an outgrowth of love as well. I want to read this quote that I love from my personal friend, the Dalai Lama. all of our friends. Compassion and tolerance are not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. So I love the way he puts that, pointing out that it really is a strength. But do people have a misconception about compassion? What do you think? Do they think of it as a weakness? And what blocks us from feeling and acting with compassion? Beth?
Well, I definitely think that we may have a number of myths about what compassion is and isn't, and I commonly hear folks who view it as more of something that makes me weak or is going to get in the way of my being able to accomplish what I need to get accomplished. But I think for me, when I think about what blocks it, really, in a nutshell, comes down to fear. And so fears that we may have about kind of making ourselves vulnerable in order to kind of receive the compassion we might need from other folks or from ourselves, or fear about what will happen if I try to offer it outwardly.
Yeah. It's interesting. I agree with that. It's that fear of being vulnerable, because being vulnerable makes us feel shaky, but then what happens is we cut off from one another when we really need it the most, instead of sharing that weakness, that vulnerability that we all share at different times.
Yeah.
So compassion.
Yeah.
So how about for you? What do you think blocks people from feeling and acting in compassionate ways?
I think I agree with you. It's a little bit about fear about being accepted by the other person too. So when you offer yourself, and whether it's compassion or you're giving a bit of yourself to that person, and if the fear of rejection from that person is also something that prevents us being compassionate towards other, which is not necessary, but that's sometimes is a block.
Yeah, because it's not a logical thing, it's an emotional thing, it's a reaction in that particular way. So you're right, it's our own limitations, our own self-limitations that prevent us from that. What's your take on that, Stephanie, for your...
I think there are a lot of misconceptions about self-compassion, especially that it's going to take our motivation away, we're not going to be as successful, that we're going to, we need that self-critic to make us be better. And if we take that away, and if we're compassionate to that, we're thinking, okay, maybe we're just not going to do as well. We're not going to be able to compete. People are going to think I'm not as good. And that really is like a hamster wheel of like men thinking I'm going to be on this hamster wheel and not being good enough. It's that trance of unworthiness that Tara Brach talks about.
So as we talk a little bit more about self-compassion and how it relates to ourselves and our self-esteem, what are the other reasons that it's hard and people struggle, especially women, with self-compassion? Why do we deny ourselves self-compassion? What do you think, Beth? And I know that you work with people in your practice, so you probably come across this.
Definitely. And I think it depends on the person. I think there's a variety of reasons. But oftentimes we're conditioned to have certain beliefs or buy into certain myths about what compassion is. And I think particularly for women, we often have this sense that it's not okay to put our needs first. And then it kind of ties into what you were speaking about with this sense of worthiness, right? Is it okay or is it not okay? Do I deserve to take this in? So a lot of work around how do we kind of move through some of those blocks that show up.
Yeah, so those old notions of selfishness, or it's too egocentric to allow in the good in that way and to reach out that way. Yeah. What do you think?
I think I am going to add one more layer to that, and that is our desire to be perfect. So, accepting our imperfections, which make us perfect, would be a better way to be compassionate towards ourselves. And I think a lot of times when we want to be perfect, we think that we are going to be judged by others, but it's really us judging ourselves. So adding to that layer of being kind to ourselves and yet not being perfect, it's perfectly fine.
Loving ourselves, warts, flaws, and all, and loving others that same way as well. We want others not to judge us. Yeah. We don't want to judge ourselves. Stephanie?
But we do judge ourselves.
But we do.
We judge ourselves
being
constantly.
Human.
Yeah, being
constantly.
Human. We have
it's
that
our default mechanism.
Yeah, we have that commentary that's always going on, and it's not just going on for me, it's going on for everything that I see. And so I have this kind of proving ground. If I can work with myself with it, I get a million opportunities to work with being compassionate to other people if I can actually work with that one myself.
So start with ourselves.
Start with ourselves.
Practice.
Practice. This is the proving ground for what is going to go out into the world.
Yeah.
And if anything, practice self-compassion for what you can offer the world, and then just kind of see what happens. It's kind of amazing things happen.
So I'm going to share another quote from the Dalai Lama about this. He said a lot about compassion. Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. So what do you think about that?
I love that. And I think about what a different place this world might look like if we were all practicing not only self-compassion, but also receiving compassion and really kind of taking it in and savoring it. I think that's something else that shows up a lot in my practice, is that it's really difficult sometimes to receive it from others. But whether it's coming from someone else or coming from myself, I think that that compassion flowing in is what helps us to prevent ourselves from becoming depleted over time. So that it's almost like breathing. We have to breathe it in order to be able to breathe it back out into the world again.
Yeah, it's that ebb and flow, that give and take, right?
Yep.
Receiving is the complete loop of that, right? You're right, so we don't feel drained or depleted in general.
Yeah.
So do you think it's necessary for our survival as well, Kapu and Stephanie?
Yes, and along the lines of receiving, it's also about being grateful and receiving it with gratitude. And if once we do that, then we are able to project that back to the world. So it's very important.
Giving back, service, yes? Yeah. Compassion is a path of service, a path of love.
And also what it does neurobiologically. I mean, it's working with the reward system, the oxytocin system. We're working with mammalian caregiving systems. These are natural painkillers. This is like the love chemical. And we're creating that. And we're actually becoming like love generators. When we do that, try it, like take a few minutes and like find a little spot and just like use these mammalian caregiving reflexes. It really creates miracles in your own body. If you have pain, if you have, and then you just can't help it. It's infectious. It really is.
Well, thanks for bringing that kind of scientific aspect into it. It's really true, but we can feel that. There's a rush.
Yeah.
There's a rush when you express compassion, when you act compassionately, and when you receive the other end of it as well. It's a little bit of a high. They talk about that helper's high. It's literal, that feeling. It releases adrenaline even a little bit. So all of that is really very, very true. So as we talk about, I guess our goal today is a little bit of wanting to spread compassion on a wider scale. If we look at ourselves as individuals and then part of a collective, if we all practice compassion, how that would change our relationships one-on-one, small groups, and how the world overall would change. We'd love to see that be the shift. Maybe, compassion, back to the simple compassion, would shift things for us. And we can also talk about it from a spiritual point of view even further. It's oneness versus separation. That broader spiritual perspective that we really are all connected anyway. So that which I express to you folds back to me anyway. What does that make you think also, Beth?
Well, I think it helps me remember the interconnectedness of everything, and actually how important it is, maybe even when we aren't feeling loving, right? That sometimes those most compassionate acts are the ones that we can offer to someone who maybe is not treating us in a particularly kind way, or is not maybe aligned with our own value system, but how can we offer that sense of care to them as well?
Yeah. Because they're suffering on some level.
Absolutely.
There's some degree of that. What do you think for yourself?
Taking a step back from stepping out of our own head, right? And then saying, let me put myself out in their head and see how I can help them.
Yeah, I love that as well. So.
Yeah. And those are both great points, like being caught in that story of like what's happening to me and asking that question. The inquiry is so important. What happened to them? Like, why are they in that space? And me in my head, if I can really take a moment to say, what can I do in this moment now? Like mindfulness, being aware, and coming into that moment. And that does something in your brain, actually. You go from that default mode network of me to this I moment. And it feels different. We can shift things really easily that way.
Yeah, from being caught up in your heads in that story to stepping back, just as you said, and being the observer. That's the place of choice, right? That's the place of power to be in as well. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. So it really is a circle. And as we talk about mindfulness and loving kindness, which fortunately are becoming mainstream terms now, and people are talking about more and more. Mindfulness is observing ourselves without judgment and with compassion. It's such a strong component of mindfulness, and the practice of loving kindness being the practicing compassion as a way of being, right? And being heart-centered and kindness-centered. And they're also both forms of meditation. So what role does mindfulness play with compassion and loving kindness in your experience, Beth?
Well, we actually sometimes talk about mindfulness and compassion as being two wings of the same bird.
Yeah.
So we really need both wings in order to take flight. And so I think when we're using the metta practice, practicing that loving kindness, it's also a way of helping us to remain connected to our own intention and motivation to keep coming back to this place of extending, right? How can I continue to move through the world from a place of compassionate responding, figuring out moment to moment, what's the most caring thing I can do for well-being?
Say a little bit more about the metta practice. What are the words that people can use for cultivating loving kindness?
Well, it depends, and I think you can work to find words that fit for you, but oftentimes there is kind of a practice of saying, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be at peace.
I think when you are at peace, basically once you are at peace with yourself, then the lens with which you view the world is so much clearer. Just taking that pause is the most important thing. And meditation is one way to achieve that, because it takes you away from the rush, like you said, happiness, excitement, euphoria. Just settling down.
Put you in that state of allowing, that state of receptivity, your center, and you're right. So you're repositioning your awareness from that state. And Stephanie, I know you're studying certainly mindfulness and self-compassion. So what's your take on that?
So I really think self-compassion and compassion is the prerequisite to mindfulness, because when you're going to sit and watch what's going on in your mind without that tool of, being able to be with whatever it is, I think you really need to have a little bit of self-compassion. So a good way to cultivate it is like that metta practice. And where traditionally it's may I be happy to start with, sometimes we need to start with someone else that we really love. And we can really cultivate those neurobiological good feeling chemicals and then approach, me. Because we have to start where we are. We have to meet ourselves where we are.
Yeah, you don't have to make a quantum leap
No.
to wishing everybody well and blessings. We would love for that to be true.
That'd be great.
You just start with someone
Let's
simple.
be authentic.
Yeah, so the meditation practice, so the way that it looks very often is that just sitting in self-reflection, repeating those statements, maybe visualizing those people in our minds or visualizing ourselves in our minds. But it doesn't have to be visual. It can just be a sense, an idea, an intention of holding ourselves in our heart with loving kindness, and then holding another, maybe holding the world, or maybe it could just be holding our dog, our cat, our plant, our food with loving kindness. I also love the compassion. One of my favorite self-compassion tools in meditation is the just like me meditation that is always recommended. And so it's using that prompt, that stem to say, when you look at someone, a stranger, or even someone you're angry with, or anybody on television, or anybody that you see, and you say, just like me, ... Just like me, that person is struggling. Just like me, that person feels insecure. Just like me, that person had a fight. Just like me, that person wants friendship. Just like me, that person wants to be loved. Just like me, that person is flawed in judging themselves, right? So do you have any other, when you talk to people, or when you have an opportunity to help people in your family or your friends or your students or your clients, what are the other wonderful tips that we want to offer our audience today? Tools and tips. Tools and tips time.
I love it. Well, actually, I think one of my favorites is just simply to greet ourselves with warmth and strength on a daily basis. And I mean that very literally, because, at least for me, and rumor has it for many, there is that really harsh, critical voice that can start to work in our heads. And so if we can start shaping the tone and the language of that voice, it can make a huge difference in terms of that kind of internal feeling state. So, hey Beth, how you doing today? It's going to feel really different than, hey Beth, or hey Beth, So we can help to create that embodied experience by working with that voice tone, and that's kind of a nice, easy way to start.
Yeah. Yeah, massage that inner voice, that self-talk until it feels better. And look in the mirror perhaps, or just do it in a quiet moment where you're talking to yourself, or when you're sitting in meditation, but your self-talk is really, our mindset is where it all starts, and the tone of that, because the tone of our self-talk can be so critical. It hurts, it's hurtful, it's hurtful to us, and the energy of that just doesn't feel good. It feels toxic, it feels icky, so it's softening that, right? Loving ourselves. So is there, for you, Kapu, what you offer when you work with women, children, anybody?
I think in my case, it's a lot about the physical aspect of the work that I do. So one of the main things is in my studio, we have this mirror that says, smile with your eyes. Like, put yourself in front of that mirror, smile with your eyes. The minute you do that, you're so well connected with who you are, and you just shine. And at that point in time, all that self-doubt, negativity goes away.
I love that. How about you, for you, Stephanie? Probably you have many different tips and tools for people developing self-compassion.
So I always work with the body because it's here, it's easy, we don't have to do a lot. So I do these little neurobiological, the mammalian reflex responses, just as though you were like touching somebody that you were caring for, and you're saying, it's okay, and you find a little voice or some language that you use, and you just say, it's okay, everything's okay, and it actually releases neurotransmitters. And I did this for a year before I went to bed and before I got out of bed every day, twice a day, and it changed my life.
Is it particular points, or it's just the act of soft
this
touch?
is like a hug, right? This is like a hug.
I was going to say, you're hugging yourself.
This is like a hug. You can do this in a meeting. You could sit here and you could go like this, and you could, okay, it's okay. You will feel, actually, the chemicals go through your body. The same as you feel the stress response, this is the same thing. It's the opposite. And just try it. I really encourage everyone to try it because it works. And you give yourself that little vitamin every day, things will change. It's amazing.
Yeah. Start with ourselves, right? Hug ourselves, touch ourselves, give ourselves that nurturance. But you're saying there's even more to it than that. There is something that stimulates a healing and a healthy mechanism within us.
And it activates.
Touch with intention, but that particular way as well. And it makes us think about what's happening when we hug others. It really is therapeutic. We need a whole other therapeutic model now. Hugging therapy in a good way.
Just like laughter.
Yeah. So with all of this, because I know we want to help people to be confident and to really shine, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about yourself and what you do to get yourself every day in the place of loving yourself, of self-compassion, of shining, of before you step out the door, being confident. What do you do for yourself, Beth?
Well, I have to laugh at this. This is a bit of a challenge for me. That sense of confidence and kind of embracing my shine is not something that has come easily to me. So I feel like I'm much better with it now than I was maybe 5-10 years ago. But like you're mentioning, Stephanie, I do a lot of work kind of body up, right? So especially if I need kind of a quick shot of confidence, using posture to kind of kick in and feel that sense of strength that I might need for confidence building, using breath work, particularly a particular type of breath practice called soothing rhythm breathing that helps to kind of slow and extend and get that parasympathetic response to come online and help you feel settled. But then for kind of longer term muscle building, I do a lot of imaginal practice. And so really imagining what that feeling state of compassion feels like, imagining what it's like to receive it, imagining what it's like when I feel it in my own body. And then sometimes it's just as simple as remembering, kind of remembering that that compassionate self is in there, or remembering that the confidence is there. And then that remembering, even that process kind of moves it forward and kind of can let it take.
Brings it to the forefront. So tell us what you do.
I'm a therapist in private practice, and I specialize in a particular type of psychotherapy called compassion-focused therapy, which is really rooted in evolutionary psychology and social psychology and neuroscience, pulls in also some Buddhist principles and practices through use of what we call compassionate mind training. And it really is all about some of what Stephanie is mentioning here with kind of working with these various brain-body regulatory systems that are all linked up with emotion, and can drive us and move us in ways sometimes without our intending. Very, very rewarding.
Kapu, for yourself? How do you shine each day? And then that brings us to what you do.
So I think for me personally, it is all about the physical self. So when I'm not compassionate towards myself, I like to journal. And I actually like to write down what it is that has happened that is positive. So that kind of takes you away from that place of being judgmental about yourself. And then in terms of my clients, I'm a photographer. And one of the things that I do is offer what is called a You Shine portraiture series, because it's all about accepting our physical self. And in there, we invite our clients to actually write a journal, talk about where they are, where they want to be, and then we photograph them in that, in a kind of loving, kind, safe space, because being photographed in my mind is one of the most vulnerable things one can do, or at least it's perceived to be vulnerable. So my aim is to provide that safety, and the journaling aspect really helps to dig down deep into going and understanding that this is about your inner shine and not the outer appearance, right?
Beautiful.
And then the outcome is that they take that wherever in the future, however they go.
What a gift.
And to that end, we also have a You Shine movement, where we photograph women without makeup and show them how truly beautiful they are, and teens, and start them young, start them young, self-acceptance.
Well, I practice a lot of mindfulness and self-compassion. I said I practice that every day. And that really does bring up a lot of stuff, So for me, Cheryl Strayed wrote, Put Yourself in Beauty's Way. She said that her mother told her that. It was just the best advice I ever got out of a book. And that's what I do. I'm a stargazer, a cloud watcher. I sit by water. I find that really, really soothing. And it just, no matter what's happening, it's something that really makes me feel vibrant.
So you're all doing such amazing and wonderful work in the world. And so thank you for engaging in this conversation about compassion. We hope that we've inspired some people today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, each of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We're wrapping up another enlightening show. Take a moment right now to connect with your heart, the seat of compassion within yourself. Bask in self-compassion. Then you can extend compassion to others. Thank you, Monday Morning Flowers in Princeton, for the beautiful floral arrangement. Thank you for watching, and join me next time on Positive Energy.